Your brain is wired to trick you more than you think. Right now, as you're watching this video, your mind is making thousands of decisions based on shortcuts that can lead you completely astray. These mental shortcuts cost people their money, their relationships, and their success every single day. Let me ask you something. Have you ever made a decision that seemed perfectly logical at the time, only to look back later and wonder what the hell you were thinking? Maybe you bought something expensive you didn't need, stayed in a toxic relationship longer than you should have, or passed up an amazing opportunity because it felt too risky. Well, here's the thing that nobody talks about. Your brain isn't broken. It's actually working exactly as it was designed to work, but that design is based on a world that doesn't exist anymore. See, our brains evolved over millions of years to help our ancestors survive in a completely different environment. Back then, quick decisions meant the difference between life and death. If you heard a rustling in the bushes, you didn't have time to carefully analyze whether it was a dangerous predator or just the wind. You ran first and asked questions later. The people who stopped to think rationally often became someone else's dinner. But here's where it gets interesting. Those same mental shortcuts that kept our ancestors alive are now sabotaging us in the modern world. Every day, your brain is using ancient survival programming to navigate complex decisions about money, career, relationships, and life choices. And frankly, it's not going well. The problem is that most people have no idea this is happening. They think they're making rational, well-thought-out decisions when in reality, they're being manipulated by their own minds. It's like having a co-pilot who's constantly steering you toward disaster while you think you're in complete control. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how your brain tricks you into making bad decisions, give you real examples of how much this costs people, and most importantly, teach you how to spot these mental traps before they wreck your life. By the end of this video, you'll understand why smart people make dumb choices and how to avoid becoming one of them. Let's start with one of the most expensive tricks your brain plays on you, something called the availability heuristic. This is your brain's tendency to judge how likely something is based on how easily you can remember examples of it happening. Sounds harmless enough, right? Wrong. Here's how this plays out in real life. Let's say you're thinking about investing in the stock market. Your brain immediately starts searching for examples of what happens when people invest. What comes to mind first? Probably stories about people losing their life savings in market crashes, or maybe that friend who got burned on some risky stock. These dramatic, emotional stories stick in your memory much better than boring success stories about people who invested consistently and built wealth over time. So what happens? You avoid investing altogether, even though statistically, the stock market has been one of the best long-term wealth builders in history. Your brain tricks you into focusing on the rare, dramatic failures instead of the common, boring successes. Meanwhile, inflation is quietly eating away at your savings account, while you pat yourself on the back for being safe. I know someone who avoided investing for 15 years because he remembered reading about people losing money in the 2008 financial crisis. He kept his money in savings accounts earning less than 1% interest. If he had invested that money in a simple index fund instead, he would have had over double what he has now. His brain's availability heuristic cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential wealth. But it gets worse. The availability heuristic doesn't just affect your money decisions. It shapes how you see risks and opportunities in every area of your life. You avoid starting that business because you remember hearing about startups that failed. You don't approach that person you're attracted to because you remember stories about rejection. You stick with a job you hate because you remember hearing about people who left good jobs and regretted it. Your brain is essentially running a highlight reel of worst-case scenarios and convincing you that these rare events are way more common than they actually are. It's like having a personal disaster movie playing in your head 24/7, and you're making all your life decisions based on the plot. Now let me tell you about another way your brain sabotages you: confirmation bias. This is your mind's tendency to seek out information that confirms what you already believe while ignoring evidence that contradicts it. Think of it as your brain's personal yes man, always telling you what you want to hear. Here's a perfect example. Let's say you believe that a particular diet is the best way to lose weight. Your brain will start noticing every success story about that diet while completely overlooking the failures. You'll remember the influencer who lost 50 pounds, but you'll forget about your coworker who tried the same diet and gained weight. You'll seek out articles and videos that support your chosen diet while avoiding any research that questions it. This might seem like a minor issue, but confirmation bias ruins lives. I've seen people stick with failing business strategies for years because they only paid attention to the small signs of progress while ignoring major red flags. I've watched relationships fall apart because people refused to acknowledge obvious problems, instead focusing only on the good moments that confirmed their belief that everything was fine. One of the most dangerous places this shows up is in career decisions. Let's say you're thinking about leaving your job to start your own business. If you already want to make this change, your brain will start collecting evidence that supports this decision. You'll notice every story about successful entrepreneurs while glossing over statistics about business failure rates. You'll focus on your boss's annoying habits while forgetting about the job security and benefits you currently have. On the flip side, if you're scared of making this change, your brain will do the opposite. It will collect every piece of evidence about why leaving your job is a terrible idea while ignoring information about the potential upside of taking risks. Either way, you're not making a rational decision based on complete information. You're making an emotional decision and then using your brain's confirmation bias to justify it after the fact. The result is that you either take risks you shouldn't take or avoid opportunities you should pursue, all while feeling completely confident in your choice. But here's where it gets really twisted. Your brain doesn't just ignore contradicting evidence, it actually interprets neutral information as support for what you already believe. Researchers have found that when people with strong political beliefs read the exact same news article, they both walk away feeling like the article supported their position. The same information somehow confirms opposite viewpoints. This happens in personal decisions too. If you want to buy an expensive car you can't really afford, you'll interpret every piece of information about that car in the most positive light possible. The high insurance costs become comprehensive coverage. The big monthly payment becomes building equity in a quality asset. The fact that it's a gas guzzler becomes you only live once, and you spend a lot of time in your car. Meanwhile, someone who thinks you shouldn't buy the car will look at the exact same information and see financial irresponsibility, impracticality, and poor long-term planning. Same facts, completely different conclusions, all thanks to confirmation bias. Now let me show you one of the most expensive cognitive biases, the sunk cost fallacy. This is your brain's inability to let go of something you've already invested time, money, or effort into, even when continuing is clearly a bad idea. It's like your brain becomes a gambling addict who can't walk away from the table because they're already down so much money. Here's how this ruins people's lives. Let's say you start a business and invest $10,000 into it. After 6 months, it's clear the business isn't working. You're not making sales, you're running out of money, and every expert you talk to tells you to pivot or quit. But instead of cutting your losses, your brain focuses on that $10,000 you already spent. It tells you that quitting now would mean wasting that money, so you invest another $5,000. Then another $5,000. Then another. 2 years later, you've spent $30,000 on a business that was never going to work. All because your brain couldn't handle the idea of losing that initial $10,000 investment. The crazy part is that the money was already gone the moment the business started failing. Every additional dollar you spent was a separate decision that should have been based on future potential, not past investments. This doesn't just happen with money. People stay in college majors they hate because they've already spent 2 years studying something they're not passionate about. They remain in dead-end relationships because they've already invested 3 years trying to make it work. They keep reading boring books because they're already halfway through. They continue working on projects that aren't going anywhere because they've already put in so much effort. I know a guy who spent 5 years trying to become a professional musician because he had already spent 2 years learning to play guitar. He wasn't particularly talented. He didn't enjoy performing, and he wasn't making any money. But his brain convinced him that stopping would mean those initial 2 years were wasted. 5 years later, he finally gave up music and started a career in something he was actually good at. He could have made that switch after year 2 and been 3 years ahead in his actual career. The sunk cost fallacy is so powerful that it affects major life decisions. People stay in careers they hate because they've already spent years building expertise in that field. They live in cities they don't like because they've already established a life there. They stick with gym memberships they never use because they've already paid for 3 months. Your brain treats past investments like they're still recoverable, but they're not. That time, money, and effort is gone forever whether you continue or quit. The only thing that matters is whether continuing makes sense based on what's likely to happen going forward. But your brain can't accept this reality, so it keeps throwing good resources after bad in a desperate attempt to justify past decisions. Here's another way your brain tricks you, the overconfidence effect. This is your mind's tendency to overestimate your own abilities, knowledge, and chances of success. Basically, your brain thinks you're way smarter and more capable than you actually are, and this delusion costs people everything. Studies show that 90% of drivers think they're above average, which is mathematically impossible. 70% of students think they're in the top half of their class. Most entrepreneurs think their business has a 90% chance of success, when the actual success rate for new businesses is closer to 10%. This overconfidence shows up everywhere in your life. You think you can finish that project in half the time it actually takes. You believe you can handle more debt than you actually can. You're convinced you can change that person you're dating, even though they've shown no interest in changing. You think you can time the stock market, beat the house in Vegas, or succeed where countless others have failed. The problem is that being overconfident feels good. It makes you feel capable and in control. It gives you the courage to take action and pursue goals. But it also blinds you to real risks and limitations. You make plans based on best-case scenarios instead of realistic expectations. You take on challenges you're not prepared for. You ignore warning signs and advice from people who have more experience than you. I've seen overconfidence destroy people financially. They start businesses without enough capital because they're sure they'll be profitable within 3 months. They buy houses they can't afford because they're confident their income will increase. They make risky investments because they believe they've found opportunities that everyone else missed. The scariest part about overconfidence is that it's strongest in areas where you have the least knowledge. The less you know about something, the more confident you feel about your understanding of it. Experts call this the Dunning-Kruger effect. People who know almost nothing about investing feel very confident making stock picks. People who have never run a business feel sure they know exactly how to build a successful company. Meanwhile, actual experts tend to be less confident because they understand how complex these topics really are. They know what they don't know. But your brain interprets this expert uncertainty as weakness or incompetence. So you trust your own uninformed confidence over their educated caution. This is why people ignore professional advice. They go to a financial advisor who recommends a diversified portfolio and boring index funds, but that doesn't feel exciting or smart enough. So they ignore the expert and start day trading instead, convinced they can beat the market through sheer intelligence and intuition. Most of them lose money, but their overconfident brains find ways to blame external factors instead of admitting they were wrong. Let me tell you about another dangerous bias: loss aversion. Your brain hates losing something more than it likes gaining the same thing. Losing $100 feels worse than gaining $100 feels good. This sounds like a minor quirk, but it completely warps your decision-making in ways that keep you stuck and prevent you from taking beneficial risks. Here's how this plays out. Let's say you have a job that pays $50,000 a year. You get an offer for a new job that could pay $70,000, but it's at a smaller company with less job security. Even though the potential gain is $20,000, your brain focuses intensely on what you could lose: the security, the known environment, the relationships you've built. The fear of losing what you have becomes so powerful that you turn down opportunities that could significantly improve your life. You stick with the safe, mediocre option because your brain treats any potential loss as catastrophic, even when the potential gains far outweigh the risks. This doesn't just affect career decisions. Loss aversion keeps people in bad relationships because breaking up means losing the time already invested, the shared friend group, the comfort of familiarity. It prevents people from moving to better cities because leaving means losing their current social connections. It stops people from selling losing investments because realizing the loss feels worse than holding on to false hope. I know someone who kept a car that was constantly breaking down because selling it would feel like losing money on a bad purchase. He spent more on repairs over 2 years than the car was worth, all because his brain couldn't handle the idea of accepting a loss. If he had sold the car immediately and bought something reliable, he would have saved thousands of dollars and countless hours of frustration. Loss aversion also makes people terrible negotiators. They focus so much on not losing anything that they miss opportunities to gain something valuable. They won't ask for raises because they're afraid of creating conflict, even though the potential upside is huge and the actual risk is minimal. Your brain's loss aversion is also why marketing works so well. Companies don't sell you products. They sell you on avoiding losses. They don't tell you what you'll gain by buying their product. They tell you what you'll miss out on if you don't buy it. Limited time offers, exclusive deals, don't let this opportunity pass you by. It's all designed to trigger your brain's fear of loss. But here's the thing that nobody tells you about these cognitive biases. They're not character flaws or signs of weakness. They're features, not bugs. Your brain developed these shortcuts because they helped our ancestors survive in a dangerous world. The problem is that the world has changed faster than our brains have evolved. In prehistoric times, overconfidence helped people take the risks necessary to hunt dangerous animals and explore new territories. Loss aversion prevented people from giving up valuable resources that might be needed during hard times. Confirmation bias helped people quickly identify friends and enemies without wasting time questioning their initial impressions. These mental shortcuts worked great when humans lived in small tribes, faced immediate physical threats, and needed to make survival decisions quickly. But now we live in a complex world where the biggest threats are abstract, long-term, and probabilistic. The same mental shortcuts that kept your ancestors alive are now causing you to make terrible decisions about money, career, relationships, and health. So how do you fight back against your own brain? The first step is awareness. You can't fix a problem you don't know exists. Most people go through life completely unaware that their brains are constantly tricking them. They think their decisions are rational and well-reasoned when they're actually being driven by prehistoric survival programming. Start paying attention to your decision-making process. When you're about to make an important choice, pause and ask yourself which cognitive biases might be affecting you. Are you avoiding this opportunity because of loss aversion? Are you overconfident about your chances of success? Are you only looking for information that confirms what you already want to believe? The second step is to seek out opposing viewpoints actively. Your brain naturally gravitates toward information that supports your existing beliefs, so you need to consciously force yourself to consider alternatives. If you want to start a business, don't just read success stories. Study the statistics on business failures and understand why most ventures don't work out. If you're thinking about ending a relationship, don't just focus on the problems. Honestly evaluate what you might be giving up. This doesn't mean you should become paralyzed by doubt or stop taking action. It means you should make decisions based on complete information rather than cherry-pick data that supports what you already want to do. The third step is to use systematic decision-making processes instead of relying on gut feelings. Your gut is basically your cognitive biases talking, and as we've established, your cognitive biases are terrible at navigating the modern world. Instead, create frameworks for important decisions. For financial decisions, use actual numbers and projections instead of emotional reasoning. For career choices, create lists of pros and cons and assign weights to different factors. For relationship decisions, identify your core values and honestly evaluate whether the other person shares them. The fourth step is to get outside perspectives from people who don't have the same emotional investment in your decisions. Your friends and family care about you, but they also have their own biases and may tell you what they think you want to hear. Sometimes you need brutally honest feedback from someone who has nothing to gain from sugarcoating the truth. Find mentors who have succeeded in areas where you want to improve. Join communities of people who are working towards similar goals. Get professional advice from experts who understand the risks and opportunities you're facing. Your brain will resist this outside input because it threatens your overconfidence and confirmation bias, but that resistance is exactly why you need it. The fifth step is to create systems that force you to confront your biases regularly. Set up periodic reviews of your important decisions. Every 6 months, honestly evaluate whether your career, relationships, and financial strategies are working. Ask yourself whether you're falling victim to the sunk cost fallacy by continuing things that aren't serving you. Keep a decision journal where you write down your reasoning for important choices and your predictions about outcomes. Then review these entries later to see how often your overconfidence led you astray. This kind of systematic reflection helps you recognize patterns in your thinking and gradually become better at spotting your own mental traps. The last step is to accept that you'll never completely eliminate these biases. They're hardwired into your brain and they're not going anywhere. The goal isn't to become perfectly rational, it's to become aware of your irrationality and account for it in your decision-making. Think of cognitive biases like optical illusions. Even when you know how an optical illusion works, you still see the illusion. But knowing it's an illusion prevents you from making decisions based on what you think you're seeing. The same thing applies to your thinking. You'll still feel overconfident, still experience loss aversion, still seek out confirming evidence. But recognizing these tendencies allows you to question them and make better choices despite them. Your brain is an incredible tool, but it's a tool designed for a different world. Understanding its limitations and working around them is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. The people who succeed in life aren't necessarily smarter or more talented. They're just better at recognizing when their brains are trying to trick them. Remember, every day you're competing against people who are making decisions based on cognitive biases. They're avoiding good opportunities because of loss aversion, sticking with bad situations because of the sunk cost fallacy, and making overconfident choices without considering the risks. Simply being aware of these mental traps gives you a massive advantage. Your brain loves bad decisions because it's trying to keep you safe using outdated programming. But safety and success in the modern world require you to override those ancient instincts and make choices based on logic rather than emotion. The moment you start recognizing your cognitive biases is the moment you start making better decisions. And making better decisions is how you build a better life. Don't let your prehistoric brain sabotage your modern goals. Watch the next videos to learn how successful people think differently.